We've all seen the icon of climate change, the lonely polar bear floating on a broken off piece of melting down polar ice cap. That's the icon. We're going to talk to a filmmaker, J.D. King, who is directly attacking that false icon. And he's also got a couple of movies about climate change, about environmentalism, the way the government uses these things as beards. Crying Wolf and Blue. His website is bluebeatsgreen.com. Joining us now is J.D. King. Thank you for joining us, J.D. Now, I want to give people an idea of what your film is about. This is oriented towards polar bears. Let's let the trailer do the talking. Here's that trailer.
For years, we've heard about Arctic polar bears roaming ever-shrinking habitats in search of dwindling food supplies.
Rising temperatures are killing off polar bears.
The diminishing population of polar bears.
Dwindling numbers of polar bears.
Feasting on dolphins for the first time ever.
You are watching the process of extinction happen before your eyes.
Think about this. When former Vice President Al Gore was born, there were less than 5,000 polar bears alive in the wild. Today, there's over 25,000. And think about this. Right now, there's almost exactly the same amount of global sea ice coverage as there was in 1979 when scientists first began monitoring it. In fact, the Arctic sea ice grew by almost a third last year alone. But in spite of these facts, global leaders are going to be meeting in Paris to discuss cracking down on carbon dioxide emissions in the name of saving the planet. But if they can't get something as simple as polar bears right, which has been the icon of the whole entire climate change movement, how can anybody trust them with something infinitely more complicated like the global climate system?
Global warming, the whole issue is not about weather, it's about power.
The entire establishment climbed onto this global warming bandwagon because it was a wonderful way of extending its power, extending its tax base, extending its reach into people's homes and lives and properties.
Environmentalists have found here what they think is the path to demonizing energy use.
All you have to do is say you want to save the environment and you're in and you get the loot. And that's what this boils down to. Money and power. It has nothing whatsoever to do with the environment.
There are politicians, corporations, media, universities, environmental groups, and a list of many other organizations who are making untold billions of dollars off of the American taxpayer, aka me and you, in the name of saving the planet from climate change.
That's a great trailer. I can't wait to see the film. There's a great quote in there, JD, where somebody said it wasn't about weather, but about power. I think that's absolutely true. Your comments?
Oh, absolutely. The whole global warming movement, actually beyond global warming, just in the environmental realm, over the last 5 or 6 years since I've been making films exposing this, it always goes back to money, power, and control. It's something that the other side always talks about, accusing the capitalist and the libertarian or the person who speaks on behalf of free enterprise in this country. They call them the greedy people, all about their pocketbooks. But the reality is all you have to do many times is just say you're for saving the planet, and you're going to get a share of the loot. Absolutely.
It's about an appeal to an authority. They use that when they're talking about the climate science, they appeal to authority. But when they talk about the political science of what they're going to do, it's totally authoritarian. We talked about this earlier, about the crackdown on free speech, regardless of which side of the issue you're on. They're going after the protesters in Paris, preemptively arresting them before the conference even began, then going after the protesters in the street. Those people want even more to be done. They don't think enough is being done to protect the planet from man-made global warming. But then the people who are on the other side, like the head French weatherman in the national television station, he got completely censored and shut down. It's absolutely amazing, but it's totally authoritarian in what they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely, David. And what scares me about this whole thing is how they're using such extreme language. President Obama and a lot of these other global leaders who are organizing COP21 in Paris, which is going on right now for the next couple of days, they're equating what they're doing with fighting terrorism. And the president recently emphasized cracking down against cynicism. In other words, skeptics, people who don't swallow hook, line, and sinker everything that they are saying. And so effectively, they're calling people like me And like you and anybody else who doesn't totally buy into this whole global warming story, they're equating us with terrorists.
Yes, yes.
By
Absolutely.
and large.
It's very authoritarian, and I hope the people, even the people who disagree with us on the science, I hope they see the authoritarianism behind this and understand that these people who have that kind of orientation aren't going to give you what you think they're going to give you. They're not going to listen to you. They're not going to listen to your concerns. And of course, there's a lot of crony capitalism behind this as well. That's the ultimate power behind all this. But let's go back to your film, Vice Bear, and what we saw was a trailer there of Vice Bear. And I think you focused on, and it's part of a Kickstarter project, we should mention that if people want to try to help you to fund this to completion. I think it was great that you focused on the icon for global warming, because that's the polar bear. And that quote that you had there that you read in the trailer, there were 5,000 polar bears when Al Gore was born, and now there are 25,000. And yet the media is telling us that they're all dying, they're all starving to death on ice floes.
Yeah, and this is what the film's all about. You know, anybody you stop on the street who's concerned even about global warming, and you really push them, you know, what they say a lot of times, they still fall back to the polar bear thing and the ice melting. And what we're going to do is just basically state the facts as they are. And that is, since Al Gore was born, like he said, polar bears have like gone up quadruple or quintuple in number. How can an apex predator, the largest predator that lives on land in the world, you know, it doesn't have any natural predators, and it's increased 4 or 5-fold, you know, in the last 50 years. How can that possibly be threatened? In fact, the polar bear is the only species ever to be listed on the endangered or threatened species list for what might happen to it because of climate change. The reality is this animal's thriving, and we want to tell that story. That's amazing.
You know, we're getting a lot of contradictory information from these people who supposedly, monolithically, all think the same thing. And even just that should scare the living daylights out of anybody who is a scientist. Whenever you've got everybody in lockstep and you can't tolerate any skepticism, any difference of opinions, that's a very dark time. We've seen those types of prosecutions and persecutions in the past, persecutions of people who don't toe the consensus report. And of course, science isn't formed by consensus, it's formed by real hard data. And the story of scientific breakthroughs have always been one individual standing up and challenging this unchallengeable conventional wisdom that everybody has out there. But another part of that equation, you're talking about the polar bears, another part of it is the polar ice caps, because we're getting conflicting data from NASA, for example. First, they tell us that they've increased for the most in 6 years. Then they tell us that they're going away. And then they have a clarification less than a month ago where they're talking about how that, yes, there's an increased amount of ice that is breaking off and melting on one side of the polar ice cap, but it is increasing everywhere else. So a net increase in the polar ice caps is the maximum it's ever been.
Yeah, and it's something we really want to highlight in this film. And it boils down to that. You know, if we can't trust these people, the consensus, the establishment, what you want to call them, you know, the approved scientists, if we can't trust them with something that's extremely simple, like polar bear numbers and the amount of ice on the planet, how can we possibly even fathom or dream about trusting them with something infinitely more complicated like the global climate system? That's what we want to drive home with this film. And I honestly am super excited about this project, and I think it really reaches people where they're at, the average American, and will pop open their eyes, hopefully, to what's really going on here.
I think you're hitting at the core of the issue. You're hitting at their ultimate symbol, and that is, like you said, the polar bear. When we come back, we've got to take a break, but when we come back, I want to talk to you about your previous documentaries. You had one called Blue that was about a lot of environmentalism. I think it's very interesting. You grew up in Montana, in love with nature and the natural area there, so you're not anti-environment whatsoever. You want a clean environment, but you understand there's a different agenda behind the mask that they're using to sell these controls to us. So I want to talk to you about your other documentary, Blue, and then also about the one that you did on the reintroduction of wolves into Yellowstone. I think that's a very interesting take on that. So I want to talk to you about both of those when we come back. Just give us a tease before we go to the break about Blue. Tell us the subjects that it covers.
Well, environmentalism in Montana is really what opened my eyes to the whole entire topic. And growing up on a ranch, I was exposed to a lot of overreach environmentalism when it came to private property rights. And that's what got me going. But it covers the local issues and global issues as well.
We're talking to filmmaker J.D. King. His website is bluebeatsgreen.com. He's got a new film about polar bears, the icon of the global warming crowd, and the fact that the narrative that they're feeding us about that, about the polar ice caps, is not true at all factually. But this isn't the first film that he's done. He's done another film called Blue. I understand that just went up today on YouTube. Is that right, JD?
Correct. Yeah, I just put the entire film up on my YouTube channel, Blue Beats Green, in light of what's going on right now at the climate conference in Paris and my new film campaign on Kickstarter.
Great. Tell us a little bit about Blue. Tell us what topics it covers and a little bit of how you're...
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So what Blue does, it gets into the nitty-gritty facets of environmentalism, all the little fingers that are reaching all over the planet, especially in the western United States, where I grew up out in Montana. It looks at local issues where people, average Americans are fighting really for their jobs and for their way of life out west in the natural resource world, where environmentalists are shutting down industry after industry after industry in the name of saving the planet. And I interview these people who have lived through it all. They grew up in places that were wonderful, were beautiful, surrounded by mountains, and the industry was great there, mining in some places, timber in other places. And environmentalists literally came in and they said, you can't do this anymore. They shut it down, and these communities have gone to hell in a handbasket. They've been destroyed, and as a result of that, we've seen crime rates go out the roof. Jails are filled up. There's all kinds of abuse situations going on. There's no jobs. All the young people like myself are leaving because there's nothing left anymore. And on top of it all, the issues that the environmentalists came in and shut down these industries in the name of, think spotted owl, think runoff, none of them proved to help the environment at all. In fact, they made things worse. And so that's what opened my eyes to this, and I document that. And then I trace it back to the bigger picture. So I slowly zoom out and I show issues that are going on in the world right now with climate change. It's the same story. Money, power, and control. I tie it in with Agenda 21, and a lot of the global thing is going on right now with that. Population control is touched on as well.
When you're talking about that, I've seen a lot of stories about this as we talk to people about their struggles with BLM, the Department of Interior, at the Bundy Ranch, for example. There was the endangered species of the desert tortoise, and yet the BLM had collected over 1,000 of these and eventually took them out of their habitat, kept them in their area, said, well, we can't afford to feed them ourselves, so they euthanized them. They didn't release them out into the environment where they could survive. They euthanized them. So this is the insanity that they're doing, but seeing the same sort of thing that you're talking about, the devastation of the local economies. We've seen that in Oregon with the miners and the loggers out there, how they completely shut down their economy, said, don't worry, we're going to give you, we know that all the jobs are based around logging, but we're going to give you money from Washington for 10 years. Well, the 10 years ended, and now they're in dire straits because they got this transitional welfare state that's now being cut off. JD, that's essentially, as I see it, what's going to be happening to entire countries, what they have done to those areas, those specific areas like you're talking about in Montana and the ones that I've seen in Oregon and in Nevada.
Absolutely, because when you switch to something, with crony capitalism, with a centralist government trying to switch to green fuels, so-called renewables, what they're doing effectively is driving up the cost of energy. And when you drive up the cost of energy, you drive up the cost of everything else, because everything that we do uses energy. And when you do that, the cost of everything goes up. The economy is hurt. You get fewer jobs, higher unemployment rates. And so what I really want people to do is use the film Blue that I just put up on Blue Beat Screen as a tool to share with their friends and educate people about what's going on in this world right now. It's crazy with the environmental movement. I honestly think too, and I touch on this a little bit in the film, that by and large it is a replacement ethic that's being pushed by the totalitarians. They want out with the old. They want out with Christianity and Judeo-Christian values, and they want to replace that with something because they know people need that. And what they're doing is they're trying to replace that with an ethic that's all about the environment. Right and wrong is all defined with the environment now. Are you good for the planet? Is your carbon footprint too big? And it doesn't matter what the heck you do with yourself or what your life, what you believe, what kind of lifestyle you lead. It's all about this replacement ethic. And that's something that's really concerning to me as well.
We saw that exactly when we followed the Pope around. He was making a moral issue out of global warming, and he was telling people that, completely ignoring all the moral issues that the Catholic Church has traditionally upheld, completely ignoring those and saying the overriding and the only thing that he's really concerned about are open borders and controlling the energy usage of people. But the reality of it is that that's not compassion. That is not helping the poor. The thing that affects life expectancy and standard of living more than anything else is cheap, available energy.
Absolutely.
And so there are ways to make that cleaner. But if you come in with your fiat pronouncements using an authoritarian approach, a top-down approach, to do that, what they're doing is they're creating a new kind of imperialism. That's what India said. Hey, we don't like the fact that you're arbitrarily going to decide at some international level which countries are allowed to grow and which ones are going to be forced to shrink. And that's quite frankly what we're going to be seeing here. We've seen it already, as you pointed out in your documentary, Blue, and as we've seen in our news reporting, we have seen how they are selectively shutting down core raw material resource industries in the United States, but it's not going to stop there. The people who live in the suburbs and the cities need to understand that Agenda 21 is going to be coming for them too. We've already seen them moving for their barbecue grills, for their wood stoves, for everything, because this is about total domination. They will never be satisfied with enough. They'll never have enough. They're just like J.D. Rockefeller when he asked how much is enough. He said, well, always just a little bit more. They will always want more power over you, more of your money, and that's where they're coming for everybody. They're going to take away. If they don't respect the land rights, the property rights of people who have lived on these, they have these mines for over a century and a half, they're not going to respect your homeowner's deed either.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to these people who live out there and who were raised in the industry there, whether it's the mining industry or the timber industry, these people love the land so much. That's why they live there. They live there for the beauty, and they understand it better than anybody else. And what devastates me is when I see these people get labeled as, these people who just want to pillage and rape the planet and take all the trees and destroy all the mountains. That's not who they are. None of them want that, and they understand their backyard better than anybody else does. Better than anybody from Cornell University, better than anybody from Washington, D.C. And it is so insulting to them when they come in there and say, you can't do this anymore. That's right.
That's what they do to people who have ranches. They say, well, we don't like the way you treat your animals or whatever. It's like, those animals are not only they're my livelihood. If I abuse them, I'm destroying my own business. So in many cases, we see that. We're almost out of time, but I want to touch on the documentary that you did about wolves, because we've talked about the one that you've got coming up,
Sure.
Vice Bear, about polar bears. Great film. Hope you get that successfally started with Kickstarter. Blue, that you've put up on your channel for people to see. Let's talk real briefly, just got a couple of minutes here, about the one,
Sure.
the reintroduction of wolves into Yellowstone.
So this is what got me going. The film's called Crying Wolf, and you can check that out. You can check that entire film out on Blue Beat Screen, my YouTube channel as well. Please do that. It's what opened my eyes. I was 17 years old at the time. I grew up on a cattle ranch, and we got surrounded by wolves. Long story short, they came into the valley shortly after the reintroduction in 1995, and they started destroying the wildlife that lived there. They started eating horses, ripping apart foals and cattle like crazy. The government was sending in people in airplanes to gun them down, and none of this was reported. Okay, it still hasn't been reported. And so I picked up a camera and a microphone, and I didn't really know much about the issue other than what I was seeing was not lining up with what people were being told. And so one thing led to the next, and I made this film, Crying Wolf, and I put it up on the web. And within about 2 or 3 months after I released it, it was up over 100,000 plays, and I was getting messages all over the world because wolf reintroductions actually are going on all over the country right now. Wolves are continuing to spread out of Yellowstone, out of Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming, leaving a wake of destruction behind them. Elk populations, moose populations have been reduced 90 to 95% in a lot of areas in the West. That took 100 years of conservation to get these animals to those levels. I could talk forever, but a lot of this is part of Agenda 21. Corridors and carnivores was something I didn't even hear until after I released the film. I was listening to an environmentalist talk about this, somebody who pushes the Yellowstone to Yukon corridor, Wildlands Project. You may have heard of that, but it's about taking vast swaths of land from the private sector and transferring that to public sector. And they talk about core areas, growing them bigger and bigger and bigger. We're
out of time, JD. I wish we could go on a little bit more about that, but I'm anxious to see that film and the other films. The wolf truly is at the door, and that's what people need to understand, what's behind these moves by the federal government, by the international government. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, David. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Well, that's it for tonight's show. We'll see you tomorrow night at 7 Central, 8 p.m. Eastern for the InfoWars Nightly News.
Shane Steiner's involvement with InfoWarsLife.com truly happened in an organic way. I went to high school with Shane, his brother, knew his parents well, and he was visiting the office once, hadn't been to the office in years, and said, wow, I notice you're making and selling supplements. Do these really work? Because I've tried a lot of supplements as a workout enthusiast, and I really think most of them are hype. And I said, here, take some home, try it. Well, a few weeks later, he came in blown away and said, I want to buy 3 boxes of this stuff to give my friends and family. It's simply amazing. He said, why does it work so well? And I said, listen, go to InfoWarsLife.com, watch the informational videos with Dr. Group and others. They understand how it all works. I know that it works for me. That's all I understand. The science, the facts, the research, people's testimonials, they're all on InfoWarsLife.com. You can check it out for yourself.
I wanted to go to the gym. I wanted to push myself and work out harder. And that led to me being able to come out and do stuff like the barefooting and the surfing and stuff like that, which what I've never done. I never would have done that 2 years ago.
Shane has said over and over again, more than just libido and energy, it made him want to get into the gym more. It made him want to get in better shape. And believe me, the Steiners have amazing genetics. His brother is a world champion steer wrestler. His dad, Bobby Steiner, is a famous world champion bull rider. They've got natural genetics. But when you added this to the mix, in Shane's own words, it took him to the next level. Shane noticed the mental clarity. Bobby was able to work out longer and gain muscle mass. He's already completely shredded. I gotta admit, for me, the biggest effect has been libido. Now, I've never claimed to have a body like some beach model, but back when I was 20, 22 years old and worked out every day, I looked great. But over the years, and being married, having 3 kids, and working 18 hours a day, I gained basically 100 pounds. And it's been a long process losing that weight in the last 4 years. But if you look at the photos and the videos of what I looked like 4 or 5 years ago versus today, the results are dramatic. I'd already cleaned up my diet, I was working out hard, but I'd only lost about 20 pounds. It was adding the other key ingredients from InfoWarsLife.com that helped me personally go to the next level and shed another 35 pounds.
This has actually made me feel so good that here lately, about a year ago, I started training jiu-jitsu, and that kind of led to doing some boxing and kickboxing. I mean, it's amazing that 2 years ago, I was on the couch and couldn't even tie my shoes, and now I'm training with MMA fighters and just doing stuff that I never thought that I would be doing ever again. So Super Male Vitality has allowed me to do some amazing things, and if it has those kind of effects for me, I know that it will do great things for you. So just try Super Male Vitality. I promise you, you'll love it.
And finally, let's look at Anthony Gucciardi, Infowars.com reporter. He also works with Dr. Group and others, helping develop the newest, most cutting-edge, high-quality supplements. Let's take a look at what happened when he tried to barefoot ski for the first time with the Steiners. And remember, we're not making fun of him. He had the will to get in the arena, and he's lost more than 10 pounds in the last few years of fat and gained more than 10 pounds of muscle. And Anthony chalks it up to Super Male Vitality as well. Bottom line, folks, you want to discover the power of Super Male Vitality and Super Female Vitality for yourself by visiting InfoWarsLife.com today or by calling toll-free 888-253-3139.